Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say at the outset, in response to Senator Cornyn, and your conclusion about the unlawful nature of the Muslim travel ban was, of course, a position which was supported by 3 different federal courts that stopped the enforcement of that ban and ultimately led to the president withdrawing that particular travel ban. Is that not true?
That's correct.
Thank you. I want to mention at the outset here that this is a critically important hearing. I want to thank Senator Graham and Senator Whitehouse for the bipartisan nature and the cooperation in this hearing. I think the testimony we've received from these witnesses and the presence of so many other of my colleagues is an indication of how we view the severity and gravity of the issue before us. I am troubled that this great committee, with its great chairman and all its members, does not have professional staff assigned to this investigation. It's the ordinary staff of the subcommittee who are working it. I think that what we have seen with this situation calls for the appointment of an independent commission, presidential commission or congressional commission, one that is clearly independent, transparent, and can get to the bottom of the Russian involvement in our last election process and the threat we face in the future because of it. Short of that, we'll continue to do our best on a committee level with meager resources in both the Intelligence Committee and here. And this is, I think, an issue that begs for so much more. I might also say that I'm starting to hear from the Republican side of the table some real concern about Section 702, which Senator Lee, Republican member of the committee, and myself have been calling for reform on for several years. Unfortunately, we didn't have the support from the other side of the table when we did. I hope that we can get it now when we talk about real reform of the 702 and protecting the rights of individuals in America. Ms. Yates, let me ask you about this meeting on January the 26th with White House counsel Don McGahn. You shared the Justice Department's concern about his communications with Russia, his apparent dishonesty about those communications, and his vulnerability to blackmail. Is that correct?
That's right.
Was there anything else about the relationship of General Flynn and the Russians, other than his representations that he'd had no conversations, that you warned Don McGahn about?
No.
So it didn't go back to his trip to Moscow, money received, and so forth?
No, it did not.
It was strictly on that question?
Yes.
And then you had a second meeting the next day.
That's right.
Correct? On January the 27th.
At his request, yes.
At Mr. McGahn's request. And at that second meeting, did Mr. McGahn say anything about whether he had taken the information you'd given him the previous day to the president?
No, he didn't tell us.
Are you aware of the fact that Mr. Spicer, the White House press secretary, on February 14th said, and I quote, "Immediately after the Department of Justice notified the White House counsel of the situation, the White House counsel briefed the president and a small group of senior advisors."
I've seen media reports to that effect, but that's all I know is from the media.
So there was no statement by Mr. McGahn that he had either spoken to the president about your concerns with his national security advisor or with any other members of the White House?
No, he didn't advise us in the second meeting, anyone he may have discussed this with the prior evening.
I guess I want to also go to the question, which it keeps gnawing at me here, that Mr. McGahn asked of you. Is there anything wrong with one White House official lying to another White House official?
Well, to be fair to Mr. McGahn here, I wouldn't say that he said, is there anything wrong? His question was more essentially, what's it to the Justice Department if one White House official is lying to another? In other words, why is this something that DOJ would be concerned about? And that's why we went back through the list of issues and reasons why this was troubling to us.
Did you think there was a legal reason to be concerned if one White House official lied to another White House official?
We didn't go into that, and to the extent that you may be talking about like a 1001 violation, that was not something that we were alluding to or discussing with Mr. McGahn. I think his point when he made that point to me was that he wasn't sure why the Department of Justice would care about one lying to another, not to be discussing whether that was in fact a crime.
And the reason you told him was what?
Was that, it was a whole lot more than one White House official lying to another. First of all, it was the Vice President of the United States, and the Vice President had then gone out and provided that information to the American people who had then been misled, and the Russians knew all of this, making Mike Flynn compromised now.
You said it earlier, I believe, that Mr. McGahn asked you if you thought they should fire General Flynn at that point.
Right.
And what was your response?
Told him it was not our call as to whether General Flynn was fired, that we were giving them this information so that they could take action, the action that they believed was appropriate.
On February 14th, after General Flynn resigned, Sean Spicer said, and I quote, "There was nothing in what General Flynn did in terms of conducting himself that was an issue." Do you have any idea what he meant by those words?
No, I'm not. All I can say is he didn't reach that conclusion from his conversation with us. I can't speak to how he arrived at that.
Let me ask you, there was a period of time, 18 days, that we've referred to during the course of this, and during that period of 18 days, a number of things occurred. General Flynn continued to serve as the National Security Advisor for 18 days after you had briefed the White House about the counterintelligence risk that he posed. And during those 18 days, General Flynn continued to hire key senior staff on the National Security Council, announced new sanctions on Iran's ballistic missile program, met with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe along with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago, and participated in discussions about responding to a North Korean missile launch, and spoke repeatedly to the press about his communications with Russian Ambassador Kislyak. Ms. Yates, in your view, were there national security concerns in these decisions being made after the information you shared with the White House?
I was no longer with DOJ after January 30th, so I wasn't aware of any actions that General Flynn was taking, so I couldn't really opine on that.
General Clapper, would you comment? If you had the warning from the White House, or pardon me, from the Department of Justice to the White House about General Flynn possibly being compromised here, and then these important national security decisions that followed, would you have concern about that?
Well, I would, hypothetically, yes. I mean, again, I was gone from the government as well when all this happened.
You've had quite a career in intelligence and national security. And here you have a man that's been told, the White House has been told, he could be compromised and blackmailed by the Russians, continuing to make the highest level decisions of our government.
Well, it is certainly a potential vulnerability. There's no question about it.
I would say so. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.